So the story of electricity is a fascinating tale with many colorful characters. And it's a tale that unfolded over 100 years. In 1743, there was this crazy professor who would fly around Europe to the different dukes and queens and kings' courts, and he became somewhat of a magician. He was one of the early modern experimenters with electrostatic forces. But he had a few party tricks up his sleeve, and he was quite the showman. His name was Georg Matthias Bose. And one of his tricks came to be known as the electric kiss. And in this experiment, or in this show, he would have a dame of the court come and stand on a stool that was hooked up to an electrostatic generator, unbeknownst to the crowd. And then he would ask a gentleman from the court to come up and to give her a kiss, or to steal a kiss. And at that moment where their lips touched, there would be an electrostatic charge uncharged. And sometimes it was strong enough to knock the gentleman off his feet. So this became known as the electric kiss, and it rippled through the courts of European nobility. Another cool party trick he developed with static electricity was setting alcohol on fire. So the setup is he would have, in a jar, he would have water and then alcohol on top. People have no idea that there's alcohol sitting there. And he himself would charge his own body up with static electricity, and then just with the touch of his finger, poof, it would go up. And he seemed like he was a magician harnessing supernatural powers. So this was 1743. And just a few years later, when news of this magic, this electricity traveled across Europe, there was another gentleman by the name of Ewald Georg Kleist. And he was a priest scientist. He was experimenting. He wanted to replicate this. But instead of doing it as a party trick, he wanted to dive into the theory. And so instead of hooking up the electrostatic charger to himself, he hooked it up to a nail that was inside of a jar of water. And he was standing there waiting for something to happen. He thought, I'm going to see something happen. Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. He's like, wow, I got this wrong. So he goes in and he touches the nail that is inside of this water that's gathering negative charges. And all of a sudden, it breaks and he gets knocked backwards. And this was the beginning of the discovery of static electric charge. It took a bit to get to the place where we had batteries, where we could give a continuous electrical current. Volta was really the first one in 1800s. And then in 1850, it took all the way to the 1850s to come up with the first rechargeable battery that could be recharged after use. And then you take a step even further into the late 1800s, and you get to electromagnetism generators, which are the first electric generators, where we generated electric current by rotating copper through magnetic fields. And then if you fast forward a whole nother 4 decades, you get to these humongous power generators. Has anyone ever been up here? These are the huge power generators at the Niagara Falls Power Station, the big hydroelectric ones that pump out enough electricity to power 4.8 million households. So it took over 150 years for all of these developments in electricity of how to harness its power, how to generate it accurately, how to translate it, to transmit it, and then how to transform it at the other end into meaningful, valuable, useful things. This is the World Fair at 1900 in the city of Buffalo. Since Buffalo enjoyed the geographic location, being so close to the Niagara Falls power plant, it got the nickname City of Lights because early on it had access to easy, cheap electricity, and so they could power the city for almost no charge. You might be thinking, am I in the right talk about this time? Yes, this is the talk on data, I promise. You have not wandered into the wrong Star Trek thing, and I don't see anyone leaving yet. But I share this with you because I honestly see a lot of parallels with the unfolding of data and how it's used, and electricity. I think there's a twofold challenge, one of generation and storage, and then the second of transmission and transformation into usable, meaningful, and valuable things. Now, electricity's challenge and journey started earlier than data. So I think it's really instructive for us to see this parallel because we're much more at the beginning state of that transmission and even somewhat of the generation and storage when it comes to data. So electricity and data. And you're also probably wondering, who is this crazy guy whose computer is blowing up and who's talking about electricity? Well, my name's Adam Pasternak. These are a few of the companies I've worked for. I'm a software developer currently at Bold Penguin. I've worked at Patel, Cardinal, Wendy's Huntington, Project for L3. I love to ski. Just got back from skiing the Alps this winter. Been to Banff. If you like mountains and stuff, want to chat ski stuff after, I would love to. Love bourbon. I'm an equal opportunity drinker of bourbon. I love books. All these three things, not necessarily in that order, but my personal goal is to have a library one day where I have a spiral staircase and backlit bookshelves like this. I currently work at a company, great new company in town called Bold Penguin. This is basically a shot of us last Wednesday. I won't name names because I don't want to embarrass the ones who are here. Bold Penguin, we are business insurance made simple, and we basically help the three parties involved in small commercial insurance. We help the customer seeking insurance. Right now it takes 20 weeks. We boil that down to a week or less. We help agents who often can't help these customers and can't make money on it, and we help them be more profitable. And we help carriers underwrite more policies and find the people looking for the coverage that they provide. If you want to talk about Bold Penguin, we have a booth. We're hiring. If you're a Rails developer, talk to me after. So this blew my mind when I read it. As of 2018, there are 2.5 quintillion bytes of data created each day. And that's a rate that only continues to increase as we have more Internet of Things devices connected and more data storage becoming even cheaper by the year. If you're like me, you're probably Googling what the freak is a quintillion. So that's what it looks like in number form. It also, if you had 2.5 quintillion pennies and you laid them out flat next to each other touching, it would circle the globe 5 times. It's also, fun fact, it's 1/4 of the amount of insects alive at any one time in the world. It's kind of a disgusting thought. Don't think about it too much. So there's a lot of insects. 90% of the data in existence right now has been harvested and stored was generated in the last 2 years alone. So if you can visualize that, we're at the beginning of a huge upward exponential rate of growth. And the question I want to put before all of you here today is, how are you in your daily life, in your personal projects, in your work life, how are you harnessing the power of data? Because there is a lot of opportunity, and it has just started to be uncovered. And then maybe you haven't so far. I want to get you creatively thinking, how might I be able to do that, given some tools and some strategies that are out there? So today's agenda, I just want to do these 4 things. The first is kind of talk about that potential power in data. The second is I want to share a real-life experience case study from when I worked a job at Wendy's using Google Analytics. And then third, I want to share a little bit about Google's data tools. I'm not doing this because I'm paid by Google, although if you are in the crowd today and you represent Google and you'd like to pay me, please see me after. But I'm currently not being paid, so kind of unbiased take, the good, the bad, the ugly. But since I spent a year and a half with these tools, they're ones I know well, and they're ones that are cheap, and that the barrier to entry is very low. So if you don't have $1 million budget, it's a good way to start. And then the fourth thing I'd like to do is just to think and act, or challenge you to think and act creatively with data. So the potential power in data. How are we currently using as a society data? One of its big use cases is in the banking industry, in the financial industry. A long time ago, before we had data analytics and high-power computer processing, the way that we had to go about fraud detection was very time-consuming and very expensive. Imagine, even if you had computer-generated logs, if we didn't have analytics that went through those logs and made intelligible models and then spit out, the top 5% likely fraud cases, you would be paying a team of people to read through these logs and try to determine what's fraud. Now, with some of the machine learning techniques that we have, we can set it up so that we say, hey, give me the 10% most likely cases, and then we're going to give that to the human team. And yeah, you're still going to miss some, but it's going to save you a lot of money, and it's also going to protect a lot of customers. Sometimes, at least in my experience, I won't name banks, but I have a bank that I really like their online banking, but they are very overly zealous in their fraud detection. So like, if I'm traveling, I don't tell them. I usually get locked out. But luckily, you could just email back right away, and they unlock your account. Another industry is the insurance industry. And give a shout out to Root, to Columbus startups. They're harnessing data to basically see how you as an individual drive. And instead of just using generalized statistical models like, hey, you're a white young male with a 2-door red sports car. Yeah, you're going to pay for that. They're actually using models that watch you from your cell phone, all the sensors on your cell phone for about 3 weeks. And then, based on how you actually drive, if you're a distracted driver, if you brake hard, if you accelerate too fast, they're actually curtailing the risk model and the insurance policy to you. So that's a really cool way of using data, which cuts down the rates significantly for the consumers and sells more insurance for the underwriter. Another neat use case I found was in the airline industry. So in the airline industry, there's this concept of the lifespan of a part. So say you have the panel on the airplane or the blade in the engine, and there's a 100% lifetime of that part. And say when it hits 100%, and it fails, they do not want that to happen, right? Well, there's like a catastrophic failure point, but then there's like a regular, yeah, you should go get it checked point. And say for the sake of safety and also for the sake of avoiding long delays and angry customers, which is very expensive, they say, hey, when it hits 45% of its expected life, we're just going to replace it because we don't want the headaches of vouchers and angry customers and safety concerns. So in the past, they just had to pick a random thing and say 45%, 55%. But you see, in between that 100% and that 55%, there's all that wasted value that they're just throwing out because they didn't have insight into how can we accurately predict. Maybe the panel usually fails at like 90%, whereas the blade fails at 82%. So using machine learning, airlines were able to use their parts for more of their good lifetime, but also increase safety and decrease flight outage times. Lastly, the last use case is in digital marketing. So one of the founders of digital marketing, John Wanamaker, not digital marketing, one of the founders of marketing, 1800s, he has this memorable quote where he says, "Half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is, I don't know which half." And for those of you Mad Men fans, it'll be it's a truism, right? They're just trying to sell with their gut, like, hey, this is going to be a good idea. They don't even know if it's going to be a good idea. So there's a lot of creativity without empirical verification. But in the realm of digital marketing, for the first time, really, we're able to get insight when we connect all of the channels. And so instead of just saying, I think our customer base really likes basketball, so we're going to do a big spend on March Madness. And we'll just see what happens. I think it's good. Well, it happens, and you really still don't know, did that really affect people or not? If you actually had your app connected and you had some little coupon code associated with March Madness, you could start to actually correlate, hey, was this $1 million, $10 million, $20 million spend on this commercial actually effective to increase our user base or our download rate? So these are the neat things that data enables in the digital marketing space. So Wendy's digital analytics, where the digital data was frozen, but now it's fresh. And I stand by the 100% North American beef. It's still my favorite fast food burger. It's my go-to. So at Wendy's, we had a myriad of ways that customers could engage with the order funnel. We had an iOS app, we had an Android app, we had our web app, we even had a responsive web app. Yes, people can order Wendy's through the web browser. No judgment if you go home and do that tonight. But just to give you a little context, when I'm talking about some of the e-commerce tools that we used, I want to show you a little app flow. So this is our mobile view of the web browser experience. So you click order. You set my location, the Clintonville Experimental Wendy's. Go down the menu. Let's see. Hamburgers, not really, not today. But I definitely am having a craving for Frosty. So go for the Frosty. Go for the classic. Toggle a size here to medium. And I add it to the cart. Think of what kind of hamburger I want. Dave's Double's looking pretty good. But then I'm like, wait a minute. I want to go back. It'd be a mistake to pass this Bacon Steakhouse cheddar burger up. So add that to the cart. And then Wendy's gets me with their tricky upsell because I want a Sawsome burger too. I'm going big. So scroll down through their hamburger list. We add one more to the cart. Add a payment method. Glad my whole credit card number's not there. Didn't think about this late last night. And then we check out. So that's the basic kind of happy path e-commerce flow. And along that way, we had about 10 e-commerce Google Analytics events. So what was the motivation for the new platform at Wendy's? Well, believe it or not, they did have an analytics solution in place before, but it was very expensive. It was implemented incorrectly, and it wasn't providing insight. So the actual start of this whole tale at Wendy's was that a board member asked the question, do we sell more Dave's singles as a standalone item or in a combo? And we didn't have data to actually answer that question. It seems like a very simple question, right? Like, why can't you look through some? But we did not have analytics and visibility into that, to answer that question. And we had at the time I was working with a product owner who was awesome, real talented, and he came from the medical space. And he came from a place where if one of the executives came in and said, tell me how many people come in to get their tonsils removed in Nebraska and Ohio between the time of 9 to 12, like, they could tell you that pretty fast. And so he was kind of astounded at the state of the data. So he started looking around at solutions and said, why don't we do a proof of concept with Google Analytics? We can get started. The barrier to entry is really low because we can do a lot for free without, so we kind of give it a test before we pay. And it gave us a ton of information out of the box. So our legacy system, if we just focus in on the purchase event, the legacy system told us these 5 things. It told us the site ID, the total quantity of product, the total revenue, the order coupon, if they had one, and the fulfillment type. And the 4 questions the legacy analytics answered was, how many items are in the bag? What offers are being used in this transaction? And what is the most popular transaction total price? And what order type is associated with a purchase? So we didn't have any visibility into how many of these are sold or how many were configured a la carte or with a combo. With the Google Analytics Enhanced E-commerce purchase event, just out of the box, without even doing any custom analytics integration, we had all these fields. And I won't go through them, but it gave us visibility. It gave us the ability to pass all these fields and ran a ton of reports on them. So all of a sudden, we could answer all of these questions. How many items are in my bag? What are the products in the bag by SKU number? What's the top selling product? So all of a sudden, you could actually make meaningful business decisions based on how our customers were using the app and ordering their food. And the neat thing as a developer was this was just all out of the box. And I could always add on custom analytics and custom events to answer specialized questions. But for a little bit of work, we got a lot right away. One of the challenges we had at Wendy's was we had a cross-platform order experience. So it wasn't just a mobile app. It was a mobile app on 2 platforms, and then it was also a web app, and then we also had a kiosk app. So right, if you go into the Wendy's on campus, or some of the other franchises have them, or airports, places that are busy, often they'll have that kiosk, and you'll do your order. So we had to integrate across these 4 platforms. And this is kind of our exterior architecture. So for iOS and Android, the way that we got to Google Analytics was through Firebase, which is a mobile-first tool, that kind of cloud product offering that Google provides. And then it went through configuration in Google Tag Manager, and then it got the hit to Google Analytics. And you'll notice for web and kiosk, those didn't have to go through that Firebase layer. Those were unique to mobile. Internal to our application, one of the things that we had to think about when doing this integration was, one, the cross-platform nature of it. So how do we come up with an analytics solution that makes sense to developers who are going to maintain this into the future? But then, 2, we also had to think about how are we going to support the legacy system that we had not yet depreciated while we do our POC and have everything be fine. So what we did was we came up with an abstraction layer. We came up with an analytics manager that was a common API of basically analytic event names, so that whether you were developing in iOS or Android or the web or kiosk, we would be using the same nomenclature. And what that allowed us to do is that we could have different data. It was kind of like the observer pattern, right, where you have a bunch of subscribers. So we had the legacy system as a subscriber. We had the new one, Google Analytics, as a subscriber. And, in the future, if there were other business reasons that drove them to abandon the Google Analytics approach, then you could easily still save all the work that was done and just plug in another analytics provider. So just to jump into the code for a second, here's what it looked like from the Android code. We just have, this is part of our analytics manager, and we're looking at the, track purchase event. So that's just that end conversion step when the customer actually makes the purchase. And you can see at the top, there's the 2 subscribers. But so this pattern was a pattern we used for all our events. And then here is a sample of the UI code. So just to hammer home that manager pattern, what that did was that allowed us to move any legacy analytics code that was polluting the UI layer and too tightly coupled, so we could move it out to an analytics layer. So this is just a code snippet from where we're passing in the data that we need to that analytics manager, so you don't have these huge code blocks in your UI code of your analytics logic. So one of the most powerful features of Google Analytics, especially if you have online e-commerce, is a tool called Enhanced E-commerce. And what that does is there's about a handful of events, just shy of 10. It's view item, it's view item detail. There is a modify payment options. There's a checkout step event. There is a order complete step. And when you implement all of these, they give you a lot of visibility into how customers work. This is a shot of the dashboard of your checkout funnel. So, 120,000 people come in. That's all your sessions who actually start your flow. And then there's about 17,000 people left after 17,000 people view a product and and start to interact. And then there's a huge drop-off from people who have viewed a product to people who have actually added one in the cart. And what this actually does is give you insight so that as you develop your app, you could say, okay, why is there that huge drop-off? Our app might be confusing around the point of where someone's looking at a detail view and adding it to the cart. So we might want to reconsider where that button is placed or how many steps are in the checkout flow. So those are the kind of questions that this insight allows you to have. Next down the path, that was a path into the future at the time, was after we laid the ground with harvesting the data, we hoped to do A/B testing. We didn't get there, but it was on the data path. And so one of the neat things of A/B testing, if you haven't worked with it, the whole idea is that you have two different experiences of the app, and you're going to do an empirical experiment. And the idea is you take some segment of your customers and run them through. So one scenario is we take 50% of our users and we give them the checkout button, it's green. We have 50% of users and it's red. It might seem like a small thing, but if the red button is converting at 10x and the green button is just sucking, then there's good reason to use that red button, even if the whole design and dev team were like, hey, that green button, that's awesome. That's what we want to go with. This allows us to start to use empiricism to actually drive our development and our features. And a button color, that's really simple, but you could do this with user flows. So you could say, our checkout steps, maybe it's 9 steps right now. That's really long. Let's try one that's 4 steps, and then see if there's a statistical significant difference between the two. Another neat thing is, if people have the concern of, hey, we don't want to alienate 50% of our users, you can actually control how many users you want to test this on. So the Google Analytics framework integrates with feature toggles for these UI flows. And you could say, hey, I want to just try this on 5% and 5%, and then leave the 90% alone so you don't risk alienating a lot of your user base on something that might not be empirically validated. So another step in this data journey was localization. And that's the whole idea of, hey, if in Columbus, Ohio, they're trying out some like maple bacon breakfast sandwich, and they're not in San Francisco, if I'm driving around in San Francisco and I see an ad on my phone, it's like, hey, try this maple bacon breakfast sandwich, and I go in, I ask for it, and I'm like, I'm like craving level 11, and like they can't help me. All of a sudden, they've just alienated a customer, right? So what localization allows us to do is be smart about how we interact with users based on where they're located at. So I'd like to introduce you to my friend, Ron, my first guy at Swanson. So at Wendy's, we had a little extra money in the budget one year, so we decided to do some high-profile user testing. And the people from Parks and Rec were free because they were done with their contracts. And so Ron, after eating, like dozens and dozens of eggs every morning, was starting to have high cholesterol, just a little bit. Mine's still higher than his. But he decided he was going to get serious. And so surprisingly, when we looked at his individual user profile, he was going to the taco salad. And he was sticking with the water. He was sticking away, even from the Coke Zero, if you could believe that. And so our suggestive cell system, which is a personalized recommender system, was going to recommend him to have an honest green tea. Because Ron hates lying. He hates milk when it lies. Skim milk's the worst. But then he decided, since he went with the honest green tea, he's probably going to go with the Frosty. And you can see when Ron goes to Google, and if he's Googling Wendy's for some reason, in his AdWords, it's pretty small up on the left, you can see he's going to be targeted for that salad, that chili salad, because we know what Ron has been looking at, what he's been eating, and we want to give him something that he's looking for. Our second big contestant was Chris running to the moon Traeger. You might remember he had a goal to run to the moon. He was a third of the way there in his mileage, and he realized, I can't eat healthy anymore. I need to eat 10,000 calories a day to even sustain this goal. So all of a sudden, he started to prefer the Baconator, like the double Baconator, which is pretty crazy, because if you've had the single Baconator, I mean, you're done for like a week. But so our personalization platform paid attention to Chris's behavior, and seeing that he was going for the double and triple Baconator, we recommended the Baconator fries and the cookie because we knew he was calorie loading. So that's two kind of funny personas, right? But the neat thing about personalization is kind of the next step after localization, that you can actually use users' data and their past activities to anticipate how to better customize an experience. So for example, two kind of emergent categories at Wendy's. One was late night gamers. Apparently late night gamers drive a lot of the revenue at Wendy's. So but if you treat late night gamers like, you know, either the retired crowd or like the soccer parent crowd, they're not going to have as good of an experience, and you're not going to have as good of an experience. So by being able to say, hey, oh, this is a late night gamer, they probably want free delivery or just different kind of offers than someone who has 3 kids and, hey, maybe you want like 2 Happy Meals for free when you get 2 adult meals. We're able to provide the customers a better experience. So up to there, all those tools largely were free. We ended up going with it because our MVP went pretty well, and we were getting value out of it. One of the paid features of Google Analytics is you can export all of the data that they have stored into BigQuery. BigQuery is like Amazon's Redshift. It's their big data warehouse, and it's really fast. And what that allows you to do is then your own BI team, right, can do all their custom analytics that aren't constrained to the dashboards that Google gives you. So these are just some examples of dashboards you can use. If you haven't used Data Studio, it's cool. It's free. It's kind of like Tableau or Power BI if you've played around with Microsoft's tool. So I want to spend a few moments just going deeper dive on the 3 Google tools that we used: Analytics, Tag Manager, and Firebase, in case you dive into these. So why Google Analytics? Why use that over, you know, an Adobe? Why use that over other things? One of the things it allowed us to do was build a complete picture cross-platform. The way they had their analytics dashboard set up is we could combine easily our views. It gave us some machine learning insights out of the box. We didn't even have to set up special queries, but they had a lot of beta features, which they would be running things on your data and then suggesting certain actions to you. It was also very integrated. If you were interested in attribution, which is that connecting marketing spends, whether it's through video or online ads, that they would be able to tell you how much a certain spend actually generated in revenue. And then also it was flexible. You could kind of build it out how you wanted it. It was customizable. So there's a ton of reports it gives you out of the box. I'll show you a few of the dashboards. One of the unique things about it, too, was you weren't limited to their SDKs and their web JavaScript library for getting data into it. So if you basically had any electronic system that could make HTTP calls out, like a point-of-sale system, right? A point-of-sale system, or any server for that matter, you could hook it up into your analytics system. So one of the things that on our wish list was to actually hook up our point-of-sale system, so if you went in, we could actually have visibility all the way around. We didn't get there, but that's possible with their platform. You can also programmatically control the configurations of Google Analytics. So while you could do it through the GUI, much like AWS or Azure, you could do kind of an infrastructure as code or analytics as code approach where you could configure it and then you can version that. If you want to set it up and you just want to do it fast in your web apps, they make it real easy. This is just an example of the code snippet. You just put your tracking ID, go to the website, and you post this in your index file. At the heart of Google Analytics, like the most basic thing is you just set up this page view tag on your home page, and then their core concept is an event. It's just a generic container of 4 fields, and you can put whatever you want in it. One field's action, category, label, and value. The action's a string value, category, and label are also strings, and then value you can pass a non-negative integer. So you can basically use those to start to build up custom questions to custom answers that you want to ask of your users. I mentioned this before. This is the list of the enhanced e-commerce events that give you those dashboards out of the box. If you implement these steps, you can see your user funnel. So this is a little architecture of Google Analytics. Once you're inside, what does your dashboard look like? So they have like this threefold paradigm. You have an account, you have property, and views. An account is just like any account, right? It's kind of the IAM layer. It's like the security layer and access. The property level is the actual data repository. And then the view level are custom filters on top of that repository level. So for our purposes, you'll see we actually had 5 properties, one for each of our platforms, our 4 platforms, and then one we had a composite view so that you could see them all. So for every event, we just made the decision to send it to 2 properties. And we did that because there's a limit to 10 million hits per property per month. So we wanted to try to get as much out of the unpaid version as possible. So when you open up the dashboard, you can see on the left side there's a ton of views that come out of the box. You don't have to configure them. And what we're looking at here is product performance reports. So you can see here the different performance of the Dave single, the Baconator, the fries. And you can slice it and dice it. You can add secondary dimensions. You can add a lot of custom visualizations here just to get a sense of what's going on. Cheeseburgers in our test account was one of the highest sought after product. You can also save these, and you can share them intra-company. You can export the reports to a JSON representation and then import it. And then you could share it by email, which makes it really easy to collaborate with other people. You could even export it to other data formats like CSV. I'm going to forward to, they have a conversion report, which tells you, again, kind of more details about your funnel and drop-off. So if you wanted to try to address why are people dropping off, they give you some insight into steps along the way, where people are going to. And then this is a dashboard. This is the real-time dashboard. We use this a lot, especially to debug. When you set up a new event, you want to make sure that it's actually connected. So on the right side, you see there's a per-second view, and you see new hits coming across. And then they have a 30-minute view where you can see, for the last 30 minutes, what kind of hits have been happening. Firebase was the tool we used to integrate with the mobile platform. Google has been making this move that they want to kind of make people go through Firebase for mobile. So you had to integrate the Firebase SDK with your mobile platforms, and there's a separate analytics container that happens for Firebase. So you set up your app. It's pretty easy. They have good documentation, good tutorials. And once you set up your app, one of the things I want to highlight is there's a real-time debug view, which is really neat. So you can actually watch the debug events come across. So similar to the Google Analytics view, you have high visibility into what's happening. This is even a little more fine-grained because you can actually see the data fields that are coming across. So if you pass something in wrong or you did a calculation wrong, that gives you visibility as you develop out the solution. And Google Tag Manager. So we had Google Analytics, which essentially is just think of it as an end state that receives hits. It's a server that receives hits. Hits are just little things of data about your app, about your user that come across. Firebase is doing that for your mobile platform and then forwarding those things to Google Analytics. Google Tag Manager is a tool that comes in, and you might say, that's like way too many tools already for analytics. Why do I have to learn one more thing? At least that's what I thought. But Google Tag Manager, if you haven't worked with tag managers before, the way I think about it is it's like a content management system for your analytics. So, all's well in Dilbert land, and pointy-haired boss is like, your project's 3 weeks behind schedule. He's like, well, that's the exact amount of time I was waiting for you to answer my questions. You need to manage me better, he says. Okay, you're fired if you haven't been there. But in seriousness, one of the huge advantages to a tag manager solution is that it allows you to make real-time changes to your analytics setup outside of the software delivery lifecycle. So if anyone's ever been at a place, especially larger corporations, there has to be red tape for safety, right? You don't want something going out that's going to put your system down and put you out hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that's good. But sometimes you just need a little copy change, right? How many times have you been working on an app when you're changing the syntax in a sentence, and it's going to take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to go out to production, right? And that's like wishful thinking. Well, this allows you to to configure your tags, which are then injected into your app. Another benefit is it also gives you a centralized view of analytics. So in case your company is using different kind of analytics providers, maybe you're using Adobe for some other application, or there's another work group who have been using a different vendor for 5 years, you can use this manager to take in the purchase hit, and then it can send a hit to Google Analytics. It could also send it to Adobe. It can send it to whatever custom endpoints you want, and to record that. And you can configure that all in a nice dashboard. It also has versioning, which is very helpful for intercompany collaboration, and then also collaboration and security, because you can actually vet changes to your system ahead of time and have a version track record of your analytics. So similar to Google Analytics, you set this up in your code, and basically you're saying, hey, when my app starts, go hit Google Tag Manager's web server and bring down my container settings. You're going to configure your container settings in a GUI they have that has a structure where you have accounts and containers. And you can see there's our fourfold iOS, Android, Kiosk, and web containers configuration. And this is the main dashboard that you see when you're on GTM, when you log into GTM. And there's just a few basic concepts. There's tags, which are the hooks in your code that then allow you to send hits to various analytics providers. There's triggers that send those tags off. This is one of the most powerful things of Google Tag Manager is the versioning system. So you can see that every change you make is versioned. And behind that versioning is a big JSON file. So what that allows you to do is a few things. One, you can experiment with things before it goes live, and they let you actually experiment with that, and you can go through your app and see how the analytics are responding. One of the most important things when you're thinking about analytics is how not to pollute your data. Because if you pollute your data and then you don't know when that pollution started, meaning there was bad data being ingested, you might have to throw out like an excessive amount of data because of the unknowns. So that's always a clear and present danger when you're working with data and analytics. So this allows you to test that and alleviate some of those risks. You can see here's a version history. So if I want to go back and say, hey, what are we promoting in version 12? It would give me the breakdown. The other thing, not only is this nice for intercompany collaboration, say that I was working on these tags and my colleague was working on these tags, and then we wanted to bring it together. They have a merge functionality, just much like a git merge, that you're able to have visibility into those change sets and then bring them together safely. It also is a great security feature. And yes, hackers really do dress like this, apparently. But you will be amazed at how many companies give access to third-party vendors to their tag system. That's not okay. Because tag systems are so powerful, you can inject JavaScript, any JavaScript you want, right? And so it's a huge security concern. The cool thing about Google Tag Manager versioning is that you can ask, say you're working with 4 or 5 third parties that need to put tags on your site. You can have them submit to you version changes, and you own the merging, and you own access to prod. So that's a huge, huge feature that will delight your security teams. I'm going to skip through a few of these for time's sake. Just one view onto what a tag configuration looks like inside of GTM. So inside of GTM, when you set up a tag, it looks like this. So at the top, you say, where do I want to send it? This says Google Analytics. That could be Adobe. That could be anyone. It could even be a custom JavaScript to have it do whatever you want. And then at the bottom, you say, what event am I going to trigger this on? And as we wrap up, in full disclosure, I want to be transparent about the challenges we experienced. So it wasn't all like unicorns and ponies with Google Analytics, if anyone's worked with it before. So one of the things I ran into was the documentation was not always unified, right? Like they would have a few different docs that seemed out of date or in conflict with each other. Luckily, there are a lot of people that specialize in Google Analytics, so it was it was doable to find best practice solutions by just spending a little time Googling around and reading. So there definitely are resources out there, more so than smaller solutions that don't just have the user base. One of the other things we ran into was our Kiosk was an interesting setup because it's a physical device, and it's a web app wrapped in Node WebKit and deployed on hardware. And for some reason, the hits weren't going out originally. And we're like, what, it's set up the same as our web app. What's going on? Apparently, there was this like archaic setting that by default, Google said if the requests aren't coming from an HTTP protocol and it was coming from a file protocol, the request out to the server, that it would just automatically block it client side. It would never even send it. But this was like in footnote on page 20, like in the bottom in a little thing. And we're like, wouldn't this be important to put up front? So it was a few days of document searching. So just wrapping up today, I wanted to leave you with this challenge to think and act creatively with data. So maybe you have a side project, or whether it's a website or a small business, or maybe you're a leader or manager at your company or team lead, and you see an opportunity, but you're like, I'm not going to get consensus. I'm not going to get people behind my idea because it's going to cost a few $100,000, or I can't really get insight to my own website or my own product. I would just challenge you, jump in and see what you can do with Google, because with a little bit of work, it goes a far way in giving you insight. And I just wanted to leave you with this. I'm going to give you a little thinking time, just for 30 seconds. Think about one thing you could do in your projects right now or at work that you might be able to use insight into data. It doesn't have to do with Google Analytics. It could even be something super minor. I can feel the genius in the room. It's just like buzzing, like there's all these unbounded ideas. Okay, so we're like going to do Final Jeopardy now. I'll give you another Jeopardy tune that I want you to share with your neighbor one idea you had. Like, just go crazy, Don't give away any proprietary information, because I can't be held responsible for that. But collaborate. Yeah, cool. Cool. Thank you.